Popular outrage against the coup in Bolivia takes direction with protesters marching on La Paz. Chilean protesters mark a year since the killing of Mapuche activist Camilo Catrillanca by police. And Uganda takes action against charities failing to comply with regulations. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. We begin in Bolivia, where thousands of demonstrators from the city of Alto are heading to the city of La Paz. The protesters are marching against the Bolivian Senator Jeanine Añez, who unconstitutionally declared herself president after the coup d'etat deposing President Evo Morales on Sunday. So far, 10 people have reportedly been killed during repression of the demonstrations, 8 of whom died from bullet wounds. The outrage against the coup in Bolivia's indigenous and poorer communities has become much more organized. The Movement Towards Socialism spokesperson Gualberto Arispe said the party is calling for constant mobilizations and holds the repressive army and police aligned with the country's right wing and the coup leaders responsible for the deaths so far.
In the
name of the Movement Towards Socialism, political instrument for the sovereignty of the peoples, we are calling for permanent mobilizations, with peaceful marches and roadblocks across Bolivian territory. We reject the civic, police and military coup d'etat. We condemn the unconstitutional self-declaration of Jeanine Añez as president. As such, any action that she realizes is totally invalid. We are also calling for the incarceration of Generals Calimán and Calderón for violating the political constitution of the state and taking a political side. We hold the armed forces, the police, Luis Fernando Camacho, Carlos Mesa, and their criminal orders responsible for the deaths and injuries sustained until now.
Cuarto, responsabilizamos a las Fuerzas Armadas.
Meanwhile, the United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres has expressed deep concern about the coup in Bolivia. He urged restraint from violence and charged his personal envoy Jeanine Añez with assisting in providing a peaceful solution in the country. The lower house of the Bolivian Legislative Assembly finally managed to hold a quorum session on Wednesday night. 75 members from the mass party of Evo Morales, who make up 2/3 of the House, met and condemned the coup. They called on the security forces to stop repressing the people and elected Sergio Choque as Speaker of the lower house. They also rejected the appointment of a cabinet by the self-proclaimed President Jeanine Añez.
It is shameful. With what moral right or decency are they now swearing in these fascist ministers, who do not present themselves before the Bolivian people, but before the fascist oligarchy?
Now, a few hours earlier, the Senator Jeanine Añez named what she called her cabinet in front of senior commanders of the armed forces. She had proclaimed herself president on Tuesday before an almost empty legislative assembly and was handed the presidential sash by the outgoing chief of the armed forces. Yet, she insists there has been no coup in Bolivia.
I want to make it clear that there is no coup d'etat in Bolivia. There is a repositioning of constitutional legality.
We successfully finished our term, convinced that our armed forces are growing and transforming themselves to be a big and strong Bolivia, sovereign and respected in the whole world.
As the popular pressure against the coup steps up in Bolivia, so does the repression. Those responsible for the coup have failed to give it even a semblance of legality. Alejandro Cook reports.
These are the poor neighborhoods in the affluent southern part of La Paz. Here the women wear long, full skirts, bowler hats and carry their children in shawls on their backs, the dress that identifies them as indigenous. And in Bolivia without Evo Morales, that is cause for persecution.
¿Sabes qué? A los Do you know what they have done to women wearing these skirts? They have cut our hair, our pigtails, and turned off our skirts. It is Camacho who has done these things, and we are never going to forget that.
Right here, where Juana is talking, a young man was wounded on Monday. Nighttime in these barrios is full of terror.
They shot him in the leg, and he fell. They carried him away themselves, with blood pouring from his body.
That is why the ombudswoman is here.
In this area of Ovejuno, Pedregal and Chasquipamba, 3 people have been killed, 3 people shot dead, and many more wounded, and many arrested too. These are the results of the civilian military coup.
Everyone here has something important to say, but nobody is listening. They fear these abuses will go unpunished.
As indigenous people, we will not allow them to come back. Now we are getting organized. We are waking up. The Bolivian people today know that a woman in an indigenous skirt has the right to say what she thinks. As indigenous women, we have the right to enter a government office and be attended to. Before, we weren't allowed in, or they made us take off our hats and sent us to the back. But now, thanks to an indigenous president, we all have the same rights.
This stairway leads to Los Rosales, where a funeral is taking place for Beltran Mamami, a 23-year-old worker murdered in a punishment raid.
No, mentira! No, it's a lie. They said he wasn't killed. He tripped over. But they shot him. We replied, he had bullet wounds. No, we didn't shoot him. They insisted. He fell over.
They grabbed my husband and me and took us to the 4th Regiment and beat us. A colonel grabbed me and kicked me 3 times. I am hurt here, all green from bruises. I am not laying. Look, and I am bruised on my back too. They had no mercy. They said we had burned the Poma bases, that we had burned their houses, and that we had to pay for that.
While this was going on, the police let loose on protesters in the center of La Paz, and the terror came from the skies too.
A special meeting of the Political Council of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America is being held in Nicaragua to discuss the coup in Bolivia. Bolivia's Foreign Minister Diego Pari arrived in the country on Wednesday and says he will begin an international campaign to denounce the coup in Bolivia.
The key aspect was the Bolivian police. We had the situation with the protests in the city under control, but then the police turned on us and started working with the opposition and social organizations promoting this coup, and we couldn't control the state institutions. Then they started burning down buildings, which in turn led to more confrontation. But we know we have the support of the popular sectors, of the campesinos, the indigenous people, the workers and patriotic business people who support us, President Evo Morales, and his return to the country.
Pari also asked the UN to protect the lives of Bolivian officials who are living in embassies after the coup.
The President, Vice President and ministers who have left the country did that because our lives were at risk. But wherever we are, we will continue working with social organizations to resist, because the fight to stop the coup is the key aspect of our struggle. Democracy and respect for the Constitution has to return to our country. Wherever we are, we will be by their side in this fight. We have always been with our people, and we will continue until democracy returns, the constitutional order is restored, and the legitimate government is respected.
After the break, we take a look at Barbados' PM's visit to Ghana. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. People are gathering for more protests in Chile against the neoliberal system and to demand a constituent assembly.
Asesino! Asesino! Asesino!
In the city of Valparaiso, demonstrators shouted at military trucks, calling them murderers. Soldiers tried to arrest some of the protesters and fired live ammunition. The uprising is now in its 27th day. Some of the protests are also paying tribute to a Mapuche activist on the first anniversary of his killing. Leonel Retamal reports.
Today it is 1 year since the death of Camilo Catrillanca, the Mapuche activist, and demonstrations have been called in several parts of Chile. This was a case that provoked a lot of criticism of the government for not ordering a prompt investigation. The police were also criticized for covering up this murder, targeting the Mapuche people. There are also demonstrations called as part of the 4-week uprising against the neoliberal system, with the demand for a new constitution drawn up by a constituent assembly as the central demand. On Wednesday, the National Human Rights Institute published new figures on the repression suffered by the protesters. It recorded more than 6,000 arrests, with 320 cases opened for human rights abuses, mainly committed by the Chilean police force, the Carabineros. It also said 280 people have been wounded by rubber bullets fired by the police. Other human rights organizations say these figures are likely to be much higher because many cases go unreported.
In other news now, the 11th BRICS summit has entered its second day with more calls from member countries to strengthen ties and uphold multilateralism. President of China Xi Jinping said BRICS has an important role towards achieving an open and fair international trading system. He urged BRICS countries to speak out against what he called protectionist bullying and unilateral sanctions by certain countries. China also joined the other nations in stressing its commitment to the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement and to multilateralism.
It's important to support the principles of the United Nations Declaration and uphold an international UN rights-based system. We have to reject the hegemonies and adopt a constructive policy to resolve the most difficult problems in the world. When it comes to climate change, we have to follow the UN Sustainable Development 2030 agenda, as well as the Paris Climate Accord, and promote progressive and coordinated work relating to environmental development.
Staying in Brazil, on Wednesday, the Venezuelan embassy in Brasilia was taken over by supporters of Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaidó. Early in the day, a group of about 20 individuals jumped over the embassy walls and gathered at the embassy's entrance. In addition, it was reported that Brazilian police officers did not interfere after being made aware of the events. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza denounced this occupation and held Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro responsible for the safety of the diplomatic personnel. Social movements from Brazil gathered for hours outside the embassy and protested against the attack, eventually driving out the invaders. Moving on to Caribbean news, Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley has arrived in Ghana on an official visit. Mottley received a warm reception when she touched down at Kotoka International Airport, where she was welcomed by the Vice President Dr. Mamadou Bawumia. The Barbadian leader is there to renew a commitment to deepen bilateral relations between the two countries. Mottley held talks with Dr. Bawumia before they both made their way to the Cape Coast for a burial ceremony of African ancestral remains. Meanwhile, St. Kitts and Nevis is reconfirming the positive state of its bilateral cooperation with Cuba. St. Kitts Prime Minister Timothy Harris met with Cuba's visiting Foreign Minister Rogelio Sierra Diaz to discuss various issues on the regional and international agenda. Still to come, we take a look at the aftermath of Israeli aggression in Gaza. Stay with us. Welcome back. We return with the latest from Africa. Ugandan authorities have ordered more than 9,000 charity organizations to stop operations until they comply with regulations. The government issued the directive after discovering that less than 3,000 charities of the 14,000 currently operating in Uganda have valid permits. According to authorities, the move will make sure unregistered charities are not involved in money laundering. The Interior Minister has also warned banks, hotels and others to check the status of any charities they work with. Health authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have launched a second Ebola vaccine. The vaccine, which is still at experimental stage, will be administered in areas where the disease is currently absent. This is part of efforts by the authorities to prevent the disease from spreading beyond the current epicenter. The epidemic has killed more than 2,000 people since it broke out in August 2018. Africa's third largest airline, South African Airways, has cancelled almost all its domestic and international flights scheduled for Friday and Saturday. The move follows a decision by more than 3,000 workers to go on strike after management turned down their demand for an 8% pay rise. The workers are also demanding that the company halts its restructuring process, which will result in almost 1,000 job losses. A statement by the airline said only flights returning to the country from international destinations will be operated.
But efforts have so far been once a symbol of patriotic pride, SAA has been
In Tunisia, women protested outside parliament against a lawmaker accused of sexual harassment. A video showing the MP Zouheir Makhlouf sitting in a car with his trousers dropped to his knees was shot last month by a pupil who shared it online alongside accusations of harassment. But Makhlouf has denied the accusation, saying he was urinating due to a medical condition. Protesters fear he will enjoy immunity from prosecution over any future allegations leveled against him.
Today, the new parliament will sit, and there is an elected representative, Mr. Makhlouf, who was caught red-handed, who is a harasser, who harassed a young girl, a student, and that person must not remain in our democratic parliament.
For us, the constitution is very clear. The member of the parliament who has a trial in process must not acquire immunity under any circumstances.
Shifting gears now, Egypt is defending itself from strong criticisms received from diplomats in a United Nations review of its human rights record. The country has faced allegations of torture, extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, as well as concerns over mass trials. However, the Egyptian Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Omar Marwan, argued that Egypt has made great efforts to improve its respect for human rights. He added that the nation was not granted enough time to make its case.
The authority at the Council for Human Rights committed a violation because she asked Egypt to provide her with information on this case, and she gave Egyptian authorities 60 days to respond. We are stunned. Only a few days after she sent us this letter, she issued her statement.
Moving on, a ceasefire between Israel and the Islamic struggle movement has come into effect, ending 2 days of intense Israeli attacks on the besieged Gaza Strip. The 2 days of airstrikes have left at least 34 Palestinians dead and dozens of others injured. The dead include 8 members of one family who were killed during an attack of the home of a man who the Israeli army claim is a senior official of the Islamic struggle movement. Local residents dispute those allegations and say Rasmi Abu Malous, who was killed alongside his wife and children, was a military police officer for the Palestinian Authority.
They are children, civilians, not militants, and they have nothing to do with politics. They are innocent people, asleep, and we were shocked by 4 rockets landing on the teen house. This is not normal.
This is a war crime. You are killing innocent children sleeping at home. They were supposed to fire warning missiles, but they were bombed directly.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has slammed claims made by his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron on Turkey's actions in Syria. Speaking during his meeting with US President Donald Trump, Erdogan described Macron's remarks as unacceptable. Earlier this month, the French president said there was a lack of coordination between Europe and the United States and criticized a recent operation in Syria by Turkey, which is a NATO member. Macron claimed the alliance was experiencing brain death. The first day of public impeachment hearings for US President Donald Trump ended with more testimony claiming he violated the Constitution. Testifying before the House Intelligence Committee, top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine William Taylor linked President Trump to a pressure campaign on Ukraine to conduct investigations that would benefit him politically. Citizens who watched the proceedings also expressed their concerns over President Trump's conduct.
The ambassadors that have already testified this morning have pretty much provided damning evidence that Trump has put his private interests over the interests of the nation, and that's as high a crime as you can get. He can yell no quid pro quo all he wants, but the fact is he's already admitted it, as has Mulvaney, and the proof is just piling up. These are high crimes.
For a while I wasn't, because I said he'll never get out of office, and now there's hope. And we need to clean this up, whether we're Democrat or Republicans. We need to think about America and think about what America stands for, and he doesn't stand for America.
And we end in China, where Hong Kong officials have called for restoration of social order after violence escalated in recent days. Now, on Wednesday night, protesters turned more violent as they used petrol bombs and even fired arrows at police.
The Special Administrative Region government has repeated that we are determined and confident to stop the violence and unrest, and we are fully supportive of the police for their decisive enforcement of the law. The most important thing is that residents should support the government and say no to violence clearly.
The Special Administrative Region of Hong Kong has been paralyzed. Radical protests, which started 5 months ago, have kept the island in a state of chaos.
Hong Kong is in a very difficult situation right now. Citizens are being affected by violence. I wish it would all go back to peace, so we can solve this crisis in peace.
The central government condemned rioters' continued violence despite the withdrawal of an extradition bill that was their initial demand. The government also rejected British and US officials' statements about the riots.
The latest atrocities caused panic and concern among Hong Kong citizens. If the United States and the UK oppose violence and call for calm as they say they do, why haven't they condemned the attacks against common civilians? The fact that those governments don't condemn the acts of violence in Hong Kong explains their incapacity to differentiate what's right and what's wrong. And their hypocrisy, the so-called justice they are demanding exposes once again their troubled moral and their hidden motives.
The riots have also caused an economic recession in Hong Kong, not seen in the last 10 years. Also, important sectors such as retail, tourism, and transport have suffered great losses.
I don't really get what the rioters want. This has become a serious issue for everyone. It's hard for me to just try to understand it. Sometimes I think the rioters have some kind of issue. They just can't live in harmony.
According to experts, the wave of violence in Hong Kong will not only leave huge marks in society, but also significant losses for China, Asia, and the international financial sector.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you so much for watching.